If you're new to the channel and you like what you see, well, welcome to Life for Gaz. Now, I try my best to upload a new video every single Wednesday, and if you want to keep up to date with that, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and more importantly, ring the bell to get all the notifications. Well, hey guys, welcome to Life of Gaz, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how to target thornback ray off a Blackpool seafront. Now, these guys can be a bit tricky to catch, they're a little bit elusive, not the easiest fish to get hold of, but when you do catch them, they're fantastic fish. So I'm going to just take you guys through how I go and do it, and how I sort of find success occasionally when I fish for them. Now, when you are fishing for thornback rays and you're targeting these guys, there are plenty of other fish that are going to try and take your bait as well. So what I sort of tend to follow is one of the sort of key rules is where there's dogs, there's rays. So if I'm getting dogfish as bycatch, chances are there's some rays following them. So here's a bit of footage of a fish tank, just showing you guys how the two interact together. So what you see here is possibly the reason why you catch more dogfish when you're out ray fishing than rays, and that's because the dogfish sit higher in the water, and also these guys are more active, and you can see how the rays glide across the bottom and the dogfish easily overtake them. So when you present bait for rays, the dogfish see that as a good opportunity as well. Okay, so let's look at the rigs which I use. Now, like all my rigs, I use one of these guys. It's basically a set of swivels, so you can remove the hook lengths, you can change over to different styles and different patterns. But when I'm fishing for rays, if I'm fishing low down and I'm fishing, say, at low water and it's a fairly sort of low gradient, then what I'll do is I'll just use a clip down rig. Now, I've only got a single hook on this one. I don't like using pennel rigs for rays, and the reason for that is because I don't want them deep hooked, and that can happen with two hooks. But basically I've got the clip down rig just there. As soon as the impact shield hits the water, that pops out, and this rig will just sit on the bottom with the bait sitting away from the weight just here. Now, when it comes to fishing with weights with these guys, sometimes it is always sort of worth and it does pay off if you just use a plain lead, but you can only do that if there's not a big tidal flow. More often than not, where I fish, there always is. Now, the other rig I use is an up and over, and just like with that clip down, I've got obviously my stop knot on there, which stops the beads from going too far up the line. This is crucially important with one of these rigs if you put beads on them, and the reason for that is if you don't, when you cast out, they end up shooting up the line and they can tangle up. But with this rig, it's absolutely perfect for rays, especially if you're fishing off a height, because you clip it down close to the weight down here on the bottom swivel. It comes up to the top. I've got a little line clip just on the top genie clip just here. That goes up over the top, and then it hooks back down to the weight for casting, so it'll sit like that. Once that impact shield hits the water, that pops off. It pops off with the line at the top, and then this one will actually trail off across the bottom of the sea. Now, this one in total is about 7 foot long, so it puts a lot of distance between your weight and where the fish is. So as this is floated back off up here somewhere, the ray can sit on this without ever coming into contact with the anchors on the weight, which is one of the things people think can put the rays off when it comes to biting. Now, what we'll do is we'll go through a few other parts of this video and some of the other things that I look for whilst targeting these fish. For me, my favourite colours for rays have to be yellows and oranges, and there is also a rumour going around that rays like to follow yellow line, and to be fair, lots of the rays that I've had have been on rods which have a yellow main line. Here's a good example of a ray caught on a long flowing trace. Now, when it comes to bait for thornback rays round here, these guys aren't fussy. One of the only baits I don't seem to catch them on is crab, but I'm going to show you guys now some of the baits that I don't leave home without. And these are often baits which will target and pick up these thornback rays. So here's a selection of baits that I use. Mackerel and squid wraps, just squid on its own. We've got some shellfish, obviously worm works really well as well. Now for me, the sea conditions seem to play a big part in this, and I always think that rays, if you can cast over the surf and down into a gully, then they're going to sort of stand a good chance of hanging out there. I find that they don't always like the surf, and I tend to catch them on nights where there's a little bit of lump in the water, but not much in terms of surf action, and that's what does me well. So here's a quick view of some sea condition that I have caught rays in the past. You can see the surf is in close and the lumpier water is easily within casting range. Now, understanding rays' behaviour really helps when it comes to catching these guys. These guys are nocturnal scavengers and predators, and when you're out fishing for them, if you go out in the day, more often than not these guys are buried into the seabed, just like you'll see in this little bit of aquarium footage. Now this doesn't mean that you can't catch these fish during the day, it just means that it's more unlikely. Normally what happens is as it gets dark, the rays actually start going out and scavenging for their food, and this is where I get most of my success. So for me, one of the biggest and key factors of catching thornback ray is actually knowing sort of the area that you're going to go and fish. These guys definitely seem to hold in very particular areas, which means to go out and catch them you need to be able to identify where they are, both at high tide and low tide, depending on where and how you're fishing for them. Now I tend to try and target rays when I'm low watering. The main reason for that is to try and pull a big ray up over the walls quite hard, and releasing them off the walls quite difficult as well. So if I can, I try not to fish for these guys if I'm up there. But when I'm low watering, this is what I'll go out and look for, and you'll have to excuse this diagram. It was drawn on Microsoft Paint. So here's a quick sort of side view, a cross section as you would of the beach, showing from high to low as if you were looking at it side on. When low watering for these guys, what I'll always do is I'll try and find an area of beach where I can cast over that surf zone into the target ray zone. That means being able usually to cast over the sandbank and then down into that deeper sort of gully behind them. And this usually does me well. And of course, if I can find a bit of beach with the same sort of setup, then I'll fish for these guys at high tide in exactly the same way, casting over that surf into the gully. Now in this next section, I'm just going to show you what sort of bites to look out for. Now although rays can, and they've done it to me in the past, absolutely scream off, try and pull your rod out of stand or give you huge great big slack liners, more often than not, what these fish do is they'll glide in really gently, they'll sit over the top of your bait, and they'll take their time to sort of decide whether they want to eat it, and as they're eating it they'll also hover over it as well. So I've got a bit of footage now, and I'll sort of talk you through the little movements which you see on your rod tips before that ray picks the bait up and moves off. Now I've had bites with thornback rays which have lasted over 20 minutes before and managed to pick that fish up on the end of it. So patience is always a good thing to have. If you watch the rod on the right hand side, you'll start to see these little bites. Now this bite actually for this fish in the original video footage took around about sort of 10 minutes to really develop before I got that pull down at the end. But if you watch that rod carefully, what you'll see is you'll see little quivers on it, little judders on it. It's very delicate and very slight movements which don't match the wave action. Now once that obviously happens, I just stand there, I wait until you get a pull down at the end, and I'll let this just play out and you'll see that pull down, which is what I always look for when I come to striking into these fish. And here comes that pull down, and what this is the fish picking up that bait and moving away with it. But you can see how delicate and gentle rays are. Now once you've got a ray on the line, they tend to do one of two things. They either come up into the water and they use their sort of body to sort of kite around out there, and this can give you quite an active fight. I've had them take line and all sorts doing this. And the other bit of footage is a ray that sticks itself down to the bottom. Now the higher you're fishing, the more the ray will stick itself down to the bottom, and it's like trying to pull a suction cup up. But this one, which stuck itself to the bottom, was out at low water. So I'll show you these two fights. So this ray, the first one here, is one that screamed off. Now this ray actually slacklined me, but unfortunately I didn't have the video footage of the bite to show you guys. But if you watch the direction of the rod, you'll see that it moves from side to side, and this is the ray high up in the water trying to swim away from me as I'm reeling it in. As opposed to this next fish, which is one which picked the bait up and stayed very low to the bottom. And as I was bringing this fish in, you'll see that every now and again it just stops, and that's where the ray just digs in, and then you just have to free it again to keep that fish moving. And eventually, there she is, somewhere I can get my hands on her. Now, lots of people do like to take rays for the table, and they are a fish which I'm open to the idea of trying. I've never eaten one, but lots of people tell me they're fantastic eating fish. But to take one of these guys, I also want to know how to sex them, because one male can mate with multiple females, whereas one female will only produce a certain number of pups each year. Mermaid's purses, which obviously turn into young little rays. Now, to do this, obviously being able to sex them is a fantastic advantage, and it's really easy to do. So I'm going to start off with the males, and I'll show you the claspers, which are the sexual organs of the boys. So the thing to look out for when sexing male rays are their claspers. These are two sort of appendages that run either side of the tail, and they're about a third the length of the tail. Very easy to see and spot. Now here we got some examples of female rays, and the female rays obviously don't have the claspers, so you'll see that big difference between the two sexes of this species of fish. So there's a female thornback ray. Obviously she doesn't have the claspers there, so dead easy to spot. Now these obviously are the breeders, and they can lay up to 150 eggs a year. That does sound a lot, but compared to lots of other fish, this is an absolutely tiny number. So, handling and unhooking with rays, this is something which you need to be sort of aware of before you catch them, because with a thornback ray, say you got my hand as a ray just here, their mouth is underneath, so when they pick the bait up, they'll swim over it, grab hold of that, swim off, and they're hooked from underneath there. Now, when you've got a ray, what you do is you grab it by the cheek and support the back of it as well, and try not to let it dangle from the mouth or the cheek itself. Now, to unhook them, what I'll do is I'll flip them over on their back like this, and being a member of the cartilaginous fish family, so sharks and rays, they've got a little reflex which is called tonic immobility. When you flip them over, they'll actually relax and sort of go into a sort of trance-like state, which makes unhooking them quite easy. Then once I've done that, flip them back over, they wake straight back up. Don't leave them on their back for too long.
So you can see straight away here where the cheek area is, and of course support at the bottom of the ray. When unhooking, I flip these guys over on their back, and I generally use a T-bar or a pair of pliers to be able to release that hook.
Now I'm going to show you two fish that I've released, and both of these guys made it back perfectly fine. Now the first one, unfortunately, was a small ray that I picked up unintentionally when I was fishing off the top of the Gim wall. Now to release this fish, unfortunately I didn't have access down to the water in that spot, so I had to drop the fish off the top of the wall, lowered it as far as I could. Then I tried to get it into the top of a wave. Now this fish flipped over and ended up on its back, so it created that tonic immobility again. But if you watch this footage, you'll see that as that wave movement moves past the fish actually woke up and swam off, just like you're going to see here. Now the second fish which I released, this guy, well say girl, these two fish were actually both females. This girl, obviously I was down at low water, so releasing this fish was just a case of wading out deep enough to let it go. But just let the water run through that fish's gills just quickly, and then once that fish went flat and sat down on the bottom, I give her a quick poke with my toe and watched her just shoot off out through the shallows.
So here's the ray that flipped over, and this is a release in sort of some shallow water, just out low water in. And you can see just the fish actually sort of holds her her fins in towards herself, and you just need to let her flatten out before she swims off.
Okay guys, well I definitely hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope a few of you guys have found this helpful, and I hope if you go out targeting these fish you do find some success using these methods. But for now, unfortunately, we are just about out of time. So if you've liked this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button down there. Check out my latest fishing video just here, and my fishing and tackle tips playlist up top.